Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going way back in time to explore some really cool archaeological discoveries.
That's fun. I'm always amazed by what archaeologists are able to dig up. It's like opening a window to the past.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got some incredible stuff to talk about today, from an Aztec school that was unearthed by an earthquake to a Roman road hiding in plain sight over in Israel.
Oh, wow. Those sound fascinating.
We've also got some Neanderthal homes to check out, ancient plant use in Scotland, and even, get this, Mesoamerican skull racks. You ready to jump in?
Let's do it. I'm ready to travel back in time.
All right. First up, Mexico City, 1985. Imagine a massive earthquake, and then, as things settle down, this ancient treasure is found near the Templo Mayor.
So they found the ruins of this elite Aztec school. It's where the Aztec nobility would send their children to, be trained for leadership.
Like some kind of, ancient Aztec Ivy League?
Haha, yeah, something like that. It
Yeah.
really shows you how much emphasis they put on education and preparing their kids for positions of power.
Wow. So what did they actually learn at this elite school?
Well, we know from historical accounts and artifacts that they had a pretty intense curriculum, warfare, religious practices, statecraft. They really wanted to make sure these future leaders were well-rounded.
Sounds pretty intense.
Oh, and get this, Emperor Moctezuma II, the ruler during the Spanish conquest, he was actually a graduate of this school.
Oh, wow. Talk about a prestigious alumni network. Okay, let's move on to our next discovery. We're headed over to Israel now, where something incredible was found. It was during a really routine waterline installation.
Yeah, they just happened to stumble upon this amazingly preserved section of an ancient Roman road, and they think it actually predates the main highway that Emperor Hadrian built.
Whoa, so this road was built before one of the most famous Roman emperors. That's wild. What does that tell us about its importance?
It shows that they were already focused on connecting this region, even earlier than we thought. This particular road, it likely connected Bethlehem to that main trade route that ran from Jerusalem to the Red Sea.
So it was like a key part of their infrastructure centuries before Hadrian came along. I can just picture all the travelers and merchants and soldiers making their way along this road.
Exactly. It really gives you a sense of how bustling and interconnected the Roman Empire was.
Okay, next stop, we're going to the island of Jersey in the English Channel,
Yeah.
where you get a glimpse into the world of Neanderthals.
Ah, La Côte de Saint-Prelode. A truly remarkable site. It's one of the longest occupied Neanderthal sites that we know of. I mean, they were there for, get this, 200,000 years.
200,000 years. That's just mind-blowing. What could have possibly made this site so attractive to them for such a long time?
Well, that's what researchers are trying to figure out. One theory is that the location played a key role. You got to imagine the English Channel was dry land way back then, and this granite rock formation would have been a really prominent landmark.
So it was prime Neanderthal real estate. Did they leave behind any clues about their lives there?
Oh, absolutely. They found stone tools, animal bones, evidence of hearths, all sorts of stuff that paints a picture of a community that thrived there for millennia.
That's incredible. So
Yeah.
what were their lives like? What could we piece together from the evidence?
One of the coolest tool types they found is called a levalloy flake.
A livoloi flake. What's that?
Basically, it's this sharp flake of stone that was carefully struck from a prepared core. Neanderthals use them for all sorts of things, like cutting meat, scraping hides, shaping wood.
So they were pretty skilled tool makers.
Oh yeah, the levalloy technique, it shows a pretty high level of planning and skill. It challenges some of the old ideas people had about Neanderthals being simple or primitive.
It's amazing how these discoveries can change our understanding of the past. Okay, before we leave Europe, let's head up to Scotland. There's a young woman, they call her Ava, who was buried with this really interesting beaker.
Ava's story is a great example of how pollen analysis can unlock secrets from the past. She lived about 4,100 years ago and was buried with this decorated beaker. Well, researchers analyzed pollen from inside the beaker, and it turns out it contained traces of all sorts of plants, medicinal and flowering plants that were probably used during Ava's life.
Pollen from a 4,100-year-old beaker. That's wild. What kind of plants did they find?
It's pretty amazing the variety they found. Evidence of trees, birch, pine, shrubs like hazel and alder, even heather, grasses, and get this, St. John's wort, which is thought to have medicinal properties.
Wow, so this beaker is like a little time capsule of the plant life from ancient Scotland.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. They even used isotope analysis to figure out where the plants came from, and it turns out they were all local to the area.
So Ava and her community, they were living right where she was buried.
Exactly. It adds another layer to her story, this connection to the land.
All right, let's shift gears now to a slightly more, shall we say, intense topic: Mesoamerican skull racks.
Yeah, skull racks, they were definitely a fascinating and maybe a little bit unsettling part of Mesoamerican cultures. We see evidence of them across Aztec, Toltec, and Maya civilizations, which suggests they had some pretty deep and widespread significance.
So we're talking about literal displays of human skulls, right?
Yeah.
What was the purpose of these skull racks? Were they just trophies of war, or was there something more to it?
Well, that's something researchers are still trying to fully understand. It's a complicated question, and the answer probably involves a bunch of factors, like displays of power, religious rituals, ancestor veneration. These cultures had really complex belief systems.
I can imagine. So what did these skull racks actually look like?
Well, there were two main types. One type was made of stone with carved skulls all lined up in rows. It's almost like a macabre piece of art.
Whoa, so they actually put a lot of effort into creating these displays.
Oh, yeah. They were pretty elaborate, and you can still see some impressive examples at archaeological sites like Chichen Itza, which was a Maya city, and Tula, the Toltec capital. Imagine stumbling upon those back in the day. It must have been pretty intense.
It definitely makes you think about the different ways people have viewed death and the afterlife across different cultures. So what about the other type of skull rack?
The second type, those were, well, they're even more intense. They actually displayed real human skulls, often from enemies or sacrificial victims. And unfortunately, since they were made of organic materials, they haven't survived as well as the stone ones.
I can imagine. But we do have accounts from the Spanish conquistadors, right?
Mm.
And what about indigenous sources?
Right. Those, along with depictions and artwork, give us some idea of how they looked. Pretty chilling stuff.
It's kind of eerie to think about, All those skulls, each with its own story. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part, from elite Aztec education to those incredible Neanderthal tools. What do you think is the most significant takeaway from all this?
I think what really stands out to me is just how diverse human experience is. We're seeing glimpses into all these different cultures and technologies and ways of life. It really shows the richness and complexity of our shared history as humans.
You're right, it's pretty amazing. And we're only just scratching the surface here. Who knows what other incredible discoveries are waiting to be made?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to think about, how much we can learn from just a few objects, a couple of ruins. Each discovery tells a whole new story.
It really is. It's like each artifact is a piece of this giant puzzle, and as we find more pieces, we get a clearer picture of the past. Speaking of which, those skull racks, they're both fascinating and kind of creepy, right?
Yeah.
What else can we learn from studying them?
Well, one interesting thing is that these skull racks, they weren't unique to just one culture. We see them in Aztec, Toltec, and Maya contexts, and those span, centuries.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't just some isolated thing. It seems like it was a pretty widespread practice across the region. That's fascinating. Okay, let's take a break from the skulls for a minute. I'm still thinking about young Ava and those incredible pollen findings from her beaker.
Yeah, Ava's story, it's a perfect example of how powerful scientific techniques can be. I mean, we can learn so much from even the smallest bits of evidence. Pollen analysis gives us this unique snapshot of the plant life in a specific environment at a specific time.
So by looking at the pollen in her beaker, they could basically reconstruct the botanical landscape around her 4,100 years ago.
Pretty much, yeah. We know birch and pine trees were around, shrubs like hazel and alder. They even found evidence of heather and St. John's wort, which might have been used for medicinal purposes.
It's like having a window into her world. And the fact that all those plants were local to the area, that means her community was deeply connected to their environment, right?
Oh, for sure. They probably relied on those plants for food, medicine, maybe even rituals. Don't forget, she was buried with that beaker, so it must have been pretty important to her or her community.
It's incredible to think about the craftsmanship that went into making that beaker and how thousands of years later, it's giving us all this information about Ava's life and her connection to the natural world. Okay, let's go back to that Roman road they found in Israel for a second. It's amazing how we're still finding remnants of Roman infrastructure all over the place.
The Romans, they were serious about their building projects. That road in Israel, it's proof of how good they were at engineering.
Yeah, and it really shows how connected the ancient world was, even across huge distances.
Yeah.
That road probably played a huge role in connecting Bethlehem to those bigger trade networks in the Roman Empire.
Totally. It would have allowed goods, ideas, people to move freely across the region. Imagine all the different people who traveled that road centuries ago. Merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, families. It's pretty cool to think about.
Yeah, it's like stepping back in time and being part of that bustling world. Okay, let's get back to the Neanderthals and that incredible 200,000-year occupation at La Côte de Saint-Prelode. We've talked about their hunting skills and how they used fire. What else can we figure out about their daily lives from the things they left behind?
Well, the site has a ton of artifacts, tools, animal bones, remains of their hearths. It gives us a glimpse into their daily routines, how they interacted with their surroundings.
I bet it was a tough life, especially with those icy glacial conditions they had to deal with.
It definitely wasn't easy, but they were pretty smart and adaptable, and La Côte de Saint-Prelode shows just how resilient and creative they were.
Speaking of creative, what about their tools? We talked about those level-off flakes earlier. What other tools did they use?
They found scrapers, points, and hand axes, all really well made too. These tools were crucial for all sorts of things. Hunting and preparing animals, working with hides and wood, you name it.
It's amazing how much we can learn about a culture just by looking at their tools. What about their social structure? Do we know anything about how they organized themselves?
It's hard to say for sure, but evidence from La Côte de Saint-Prelade and other sites suggests they lived in small, tight-knit groups. They probably had complex social interactions, shared knowledge and skills, worked together to survive, especially in those challenging environments.
That makes sense. They had to rely on each other to make it through. It's a good reminder that despite all the differences, Neanderthals weren't that different from us. They had the same basic needs and desires as we do today.
I agree. The more we learn about them, the more we realize how much we actually have in common with those ancient relatives.
Okay, one last thing before we move on.
Yeah.
I've always wondered how archaeologists find these sites in the first place. Is it luck? Or is it more like strategic?
It's kind of both, actually. Sometimes it's pure luck, like when they found that Roman road while putting in a water line. But modern archaeology, it's pretty scientific. They use all sorts of techniques to find these hidden treasures.
So it's not just wandering around with a shovel and hoping for the best.
Well, there's definitely some exploring involved, but it's much more than that. They use things like aerial photography, pictures from planes or drones to look for patterns in the landscape.
Oh, so they're like detectives searching for clues from above.
Yeah, exactly. They look for subtle changes in plants, soil color, even the shape of the land, anything that might hint at something buried underground.
Wow, that's really cool. So what other methods do they use?
Another big one is ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. It uses radar pulses to create images of what's underground without actually digging.
So they can see through the ground.
Pretty much. It can detect changes in the density of the soil and show things like buried walls, foundations. It's a non-invasive way to get a sense of what might be hidden there.
That's amazing technology. What happens after they find a potential site using those techniques?
Then it's time for the real detective work, field work and surveying. They carefully examine the site, take notes, collect artifacts. They might even use metal detectors or take soil samples.
Sounds like a pretty detailed process requiring a lot of patience.
It definitely is. Archaeological fieldwork involves really careful excavation, documentation, analysis of every artifact and feature. It's slow and careful work, but the payoff is huge. Every discovery adds to our understanding of human history. It's pretty awesome.
It really makes you appreciate the work that archaeologists do. They're bringing the past to life, one discovery at a time.
It's such a fascinating field, and it's always changing, with new technologies and ways of doing research. Who knows what incredible discoveries are waiting for us in the future? It's exciting.
I can't wait to find out. Okay, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into these amazing archaeological discoveries. And we're back. Man, these archaeological discoveries are really something, huh? I mean, from an Aztec school to a simple beaker, it's amazing what they can tell us about the past.
Absolutely. It just goes to show, how connected human history really is. Every new discovery adds to the story, helps us understand how civilizations evolved, how they interacted with each other. It's all connected.
I'm still amazed by those Roman roads. They were so well built, and the fact that they covered such a vast area, it's just incredible. How did they make them last so long? What was their secret?
Well, the Romans, they knew what they were doing when it came to engineering. Those roads weren't just like a bunch of cobblestones thrown on the ground. There was a whole process to it. They started with a base of large stones, for stability.
So it was real science, huh?
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. And then they'd add layers on top, smaller stones, gravel, sand, all carefully compacted to create this really solid foundation. And finally, they'd top it off with those tightly fitted paving stones. That way, they had good drainage and the road could really withstand the test of time.
It's a giant ancient lasagna. No wonder those roads are still around today. But it wasn't just about the materials, right? They must have played a key role in the Roman Empire.
Oh, absolutely. Those roads were the lifeline of the empire. They connected all the different provinces, helped facilitate trade and communication. They even allowed troops to move quickly from one place to another. They were vital to the growth and success of Rome.
It makes you think about how important infrastructure is to any civilization, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's head back to that incredible Neanderthal site, La Côte de Saint-Prelade. We've talked about their hunting skills, their use of fire. But what else can we learn about their everyday lives from the stuff they left behind?
Well, the site is rich with artifacts, tools, animal bones, even the remnants of their hearths. It gives us these fascinating glimpses into how they lived, how they dealt with their surroundings.
I bet it wasn't easy living in those harsh glacial conditions.
You're telling me. But they were a resourceful bunch, very adaptable. La Côte de Saint-Prelade really shows how resilient and ingenious they were.
I'm curious about the tools they used. We touched on those lavoie flakes earlier. What other kinds of tools have they found there?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. Scrapers, points, hand axes. And they were all so well made. They were crucial for so many tasks, from hunting and butchering to making clothes and working with wood.
It's amazing how much those tools tell us about their culture, isn't it? What about their social structure? Do we know anything about how they organize themselves?
It's tough to say for sure, but the evidence from La Côte de Saint-Prelade and other Neanderthal sites suggests they lived in small, close-knit groups, probably had complex social structures, shared their knowledge and skills, everything they needed to survive, especially in those tough environments.
It makes sense. They had to work together to make it. It's a good reminder that, for all their differences, they were still human, just like us. They had the same basic needs and desires.
Exactly. And the more we learn about them, the more we realize how much we really do have in common with our ancient cousins.
Well, it's been an incredible journey, exploring these amazing archaeological discoveries, from those grand Roman roads to that prehistoric beaker. Each one has expanded our understanding of the past and our place in the grand scheme of things.
And as we've seen, there's still so much out there to discover, Archaeology is a constantly evolving field, new technologies, new research methods. Who knows what incredible finds await us in the future?
It's pretty exciting to think about. And to everyone listening out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep that curiosity alive. You never know what amazing discoveries you might make. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the past.